Well, so what? So we have looked at the atmosphere and the global air patterns, both wind and precipitation. Now, what does this mean for the study of international relations? Well, let's consider four dimensions of international affairs that are directly impacted by the atmosphere. First of all, take the big picture. Where have we been in the last 500 years? This has been the era of globalization, the era in which European explorers and conquerors went out and integrated and knit together the international system. The typical picture of how this occurred is that Europeans went out and discovered new lands, such as Columbus discovering the Americas. But as this illustration shows, Columbus really didn't discover the New World. There were already people there waiting for him. And in fact, most of the land areas of the world were already occupied long before the 15th century when Europeans went out on their global quest. Only a few Pacific islands and the continent of Antarctica remained outside of human occupation. What Europeans really discovered was not new lands, but the wind patterns and the sea lanes that connected them. Recall that in our study of the global atmospheric air patterns, as illustrated in this slide, we said that above and below the equator, there is a broad band of prevailing easterly or trade winds that blow between the equator and 30 degrees north and 30 degrees south from east to west, whereas north of 30 degrees north and south of 30 degrees south, the prevailing winds are in the opposite direction, westerlies, or winds blowing from the west to the east. This fact was well known to Spanish and Portuguese sailors and navigators in the 15th century. And this slide illustrates the route that Columbus took on his 4 round trips between Spain and the New World. As you'll notice in this slide, he did not sail due west from Iberia, which would have taken him directly into the westerlies and into the headwinds. Rather, he sailed south, down along the west coast of Africa, past the Canaries, and then picked up the easterlies or trade winds that blew him across the Atlantic Ocean into the Caribbean. Similarly, when he wanted to return home, he did not turn around and sail back into the teeth of the easterlies, but sailed north above the 30th parallel to pick up the prevailing westerly winds that blew him back to Spain. Columbus did not know all that we know about the physics that underlie global wind patterns, but he, along with his peers, knew the wind patterns, and knowledge of those wind patterns is what enabled them to circumnavigate the globe. Secondly, consider the effect of rainfall on contemporary international affairs. As this map of average annual precipitation around the globe illustrates, there are prevailing bands of wet and dry land. So, for example, when we study Africa, as illustrated in this slide, we will be particularly interested in where the rain falls and thus where the vegetation grows. And as this map shows, the African profile of rain and vegetation is wet in the middle and dry at both ends. That is to say, the vegetation tapers from rainforest in Central Africa, then gradually declining until it reaches desert with very little vegetation in the north. So when we look at countries that lie along this transition belt between wet and dry, we will notice the impact it has on the politics of those countries. Take, for example, Sudan, illustrated here, a country with a very wet south and a very dry north. And as we will see, it is not surprising that that country in the recent years has broken up into a Sudan and a South Sudan, separate independent countries defined largely by their rainfall conditions. Thirdly, as we've already mentioned, the atmosphere brings about great natural disasters. And these natural disasters, such as floods, illustrated here, or droughts, can cause enormous destruction of life and property. And so international affairs in the 21st century has been very significantly shaped by the constant battle against natural disasters and the need for humanitarian relief, which is now a major part of the agenda of all the major countries in the world. Finally, at the end of this course, we will turn to one of the major changes in the atmosphere, known as global climate change or global warming. And we will be looking both at the impacts that global warming has on human habitation, as well as the connected international politics that the struggle against global warming has invited.